Here's the real good one. It's a sad one. But this woman's, her name is Esther Downs. She's since died. This Esther Downs had a daughter who was, in fact, she had adopted this child and spent her whole heart and love on her. The girl turned out to be an alcoholic and a very big problem because she had children that were, they had awful problems out of the situation from the mother. And we happened to get the daughter, well, I took the mother and the daughter to visit Father McNamara one time, and he blessed her and he gave her some advice. But he shook his head. You know, Father couldn't say to everyone, you're going to be cured or this or that, because if Christ told him, no, this isn't a case of a person being cured, you can't say it. And he advised her to go to, I think it was AA. She did, and she got straightened out a little bit. And the mother was so gloriously happy about that she had some relatives that lived in California, and she took the daughter to California for a visit. While they were there, the daughter was snitching at the cabinet of the relatives, and the mother saw this, and it broke her heart, thinking, well, we're back to the same 2 loaves of bread. They were shown home movies, and all of a sudden, this girl's mother, which was Esther Downs, was missing, and her sister, whose home they were visiting, said, why don't you go back and see how your mother is and see if she's all right. The daughter was gone like a split second and come back and said, oh, she's okay. The mother still didn't come out to see the movies, and so her sister, her blood sister, got up and walked back, and here the mother was stretched out. She had had a heart attack and was stretched out in the bathroom. They called the paramedics, and the daughter didn't want to allow the paramedics to take the mother out of the house to the hospital because she was being a blood relative. They had to call the police department in order to get the sanction to be able to take her to the hospital. And on the way going to the hospital, her heart gave out, and they had to give her, CPR? This is medical reports in the hospital, the California hospital. Well, my husband was her doctor. She had a very, very serious heart condition, but she was getting along nicely in order to go on that trip. And as soon as she was stable, she begged to return to Chicago so she could be under his care again and be under the proper medication. In the meantime, they felt that her condition wasn't well enough for her to travel by plane. So they said to the daughter, do you know what your mother's medication is on so we can give that to her immediately? She said, no, but I'll call the doctor in Chicago and I'll get it for you. She called our home and I answered the telephone, and I immediately knew that no doctor would have a layperson call a doctor to get a medical report. They would want it either from a nurse or from themselves. And I said to her, what hospital are you at? Because I immediately wanted to get the proper information and the telephone number. And she said, I'm at so-and-so hospital, but I don't know the number. And I said, then you have the doctor call my husband, and he will give the dosage and what needs to be given to your mother. And we didn't get a return phone call, and I thought, I'm going to wait only about 30 more seconds, and if we don't get a call, that's a life-saving matter. So in the meantime, on another line, I called information and got the telephone number of the hospital. And about maybe 35 or 40 seconds went by. We called the hospital. They hadn't even known that she was supposed to do such a thing. She made up that story to them, bluffing them that she would get that record. So my husband gave them the information. In the meantime, when she did get stable enough to be able to be transported back to Chicago, when they brought her in, we went to her home immediately. And my husband said, Esther, don't you think you ought to go and be in the hospital? And the daughter and the father spoke up. They were both alcoholics. And they said, oh, no, she's going to stay here where we're going to give her better care. And so he couldn't do anything about it. When I got home, I called Esther and talked to her on the phone. I said, Esther, we're here, and if you need us at any hour of the night, no matter when it is, you call us. And she said, well, to be honest with you right now, I'm doing fine. It wasn't 10 minutes later, and we got a phone call, and it was from the alcoholic daughter crying hysterically that her mother had passed out and she was black. So we called the paramedics and the ambulance, and then we left and went over to the hospital. summation of it is, this woman was in such a critical condition that she was put into cardiac arrest. And I was sitting downstairs in the reception room. My husband came down to me. He said, "Mary, if you want to see Esther alive, she's only got moments left." And I went back up into her, and I happened to have had a first-class relic card of St. Maximina. I mean, a second-class relic card of St. Maximina, whom Father McNamara had promoted, because these weren't out at that time. And I silently had made a promise to St. Maximina that with the 90 powers that she possibly had, that this woman would spread devotion to her if she would pray that she would live. So when we left the hospital, my husband and I, we had been there all night long, and that next morning when we left the hospital, Mass was going on at St. Adrian's Church. And I looked at my husband and said, "Yeah, I know, you want to go to Mass." I said, "Would you mind, Dad?" And I went in, and the moment I walked in, Father was at the Mass part, and as I entered, he turned around like this. And I felt at that moment that something good had come out of that, because I had called him, to tell him about her condition, and asked for prayers. So when we got home, then when we were leaving there after Mass, my husband said, "Mary, how about if we stop off and get breakfast?" And any old time I wouldn't jump for that chance. And I said, "Dad, if you don't mind, I kind of would like to go home." When we got home, I had no idea why, but when we got home, the telephone rang. And it was the hospital. And they said, "Dr. DeFeo, Mrs. Downs is doing so well," they said, "that can we take her out of cardiac arrest?" And they gave him told him what the report was and all that. And he said, "Of course." But he said, "Are you sure you've got Esther Downs? Are you sure about that?" Because we had a priest anoint her and everything. And a little bit later on, the phone rang again. And I went to the telephone. It was for my husband. I ran upstairs to the extension because I knew I was going to hear some good news. And I listened in on it. And they said, "Dr. DeFeo, Mrs. Downs has improved so well. Can we take her out of cardiac arrest and put her in intensive care?" And he said, "Of course, but are you sure?" So with that, he got in the car and he went over to the hospital because he thought there possibly could be some kind of a mistake there, knowing how critical her condition was. So I went with him, and I stopped off into Father McNamara, and Father McNamara gave me one rose, and he said, "Take this to Esther." And I took it over and gave her Esther, and they put it in a vase. First she touched it. And we stayed there for a little while, and he told the nurses, "Be careful," because he was still doubtful about her condition. We went home, and about an hour later we got a call and said that Mrs. Downs was so well, they wanted to know, she wanted to eat. That woman lived for 20 years after that. And her condition was, she shouldn't be here. But it was through Father McNamara.